Free agency behind us and the draft quickly approaching. Amir and I, we wanted to take a look at the league and say, hey, who is the best team and who's the worst team? So today, simply put, we're going to be ranking all 32 teams and saying, are they a contender or are they a pretender? Let's get into it here. Of course, on your screen now, you'll see the 6 tiers that we use. So Amir and I, we both ranked all 32, but we also put them into tiers. You see with the logos where they are: Super Bowl contenders, playoff teams, teams that are good, not great, basically the Dallas Cowboy tier, on the brink, teams that are barely in or out of the playoffs. We have the underwhelming tier, the rebuilding tier, and of course the tank for Shador / Travis Hunter / Carson Beck, whoever's going to be the number one pick next year in the NFL. And we're not going to make you guys wait today. We're going to start off at the top because you guys know who they are. And we're going to work our way to the bottom. A lot of hot takes along the way, so stay tuned. But at number one, Kansas City Chiefs. Amir, why do you have them here at number one?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think they're going to be number one, until proven otherwise. I mean, they have Patrick Mahomes, and obviously throughout the season, it's going to be a different feel. Rankings might change, but when it's all said and done, playoffs matter the most, and they've shown why. They're going to be the team to beat for decades to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first team to repeat Super Bowl champions since we were born, Amir, really, in 03 and 04 with the New England Patriots. But then, of course, they got better this offseason. They brought back Chris Jones to lead this top 5 level defense. They brought Hollywood Brown in on a 1-year cheap deal to play a Tyreek Hill kind of role for this offense. And at the very least, I know he's not Tyreek Hill, but he can be that field stretcher for guys like Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. So going into next year, Pacheco's only going to get better, and the Chiefs now have 3,000-yard receivers for Patrick Mahomes. At number two, the San Francisco 49ers. I had him at 3. You had him at 2. Averages out, of course, to the number 2 spot. And of course, you see the Super Bowl logo. We both have them as contenders. They were right there last year, and Trent Williams is staying. So a lot of their players that we thought could be on the move aren't. And really, what did they lose this offseason, Amir? what did they lose? Chase Young? That's not going to stop them from not getting back to the Super Bowl next year. But any additional thoughts about the 49ers?
No, not really. I think San Fran's going to, still be good. As long as they have Kyle Shanahan, they're going to be good. This is known. I mean, San Fran, still almost made the Super Bowl, when they literally had Jimmy G at quarterback and the team was depleting, back in 2021. And so I think as long as they have Shanahan, they'll be great.
Yeah, I mean, and as long as they have what Brock Brees is what you're trying to call a top 5 level quarterback, Brock Purdy. I'm not there yet with Brock Purdy, but definitely a game manager for him. Of course, that's a joke. At number 3, due to averages, the Philadelphia Eagles. I still have them, and you still have them as Super Bowl contenders. And we're going to talk about how loose our Super Bowl contention tier is here in a moment. But the Eagles, I had them at number 2 over the 49ers for the sole reason that you got Jalen Hurts. I think this offense, you lost Jason Kelce, which sucks, but you still have Cam Jurgens. He can step in and be the next center for the next 10 to 15 years. But you brought in Saquon Barkley. Huge addition. This team can get back to the identity of running the football like they had 2 years ago. This defense got better, bringing back CJ Gardner-Johnson and other pieces. I think this team, it was a fluke way to how they ended last year. And I think next year they're going to be scarier than ever, especially with the addition of Saquon. But your thoughts here about the Eagles here?
Philly's going to be great, but I mean, the talent is great, but based off of last season, it's hard for a team to come back from a collapse like that mentally. And for Jalen Hurts, it's a lot of questions. How's he going to respond to it? Is he going to play like his old stuff in 2022, or is he going to repeat how the way he ended last year? And so that's my biggest concern for them.
Yeah, they have AJ Brown though, Amir, and sometimes all you need to do is throw it up. Not to mention they still got a Heisman-winning receiver on the other end that seems to being lost in the shuffle. I don't think anybody's really talking about Devontae Smith and the guy with a Heisman just a few years ago. But at number 4, you have this team a little bit higher than me, but the Baltimore Ravens, you have them as Super Bowl contenders. I have them just as a playoff team. To clarify, this orange tier / playoff team tier can mean, hey, you make it to the playoffs, maybe you have a good regular season, and you win a playoff game or two, but you're never going to really win and make it to the Super Bowl, let alone win it. But you have them as a Super Bowl contender. Why do you have more faith in the Ravens and the 2-time MVP and Lamar Jackson than I do here in 2024?
For me, it's not me having faith in Lamar because personally, I can name at least 5 to 10 quarterbacks, that I arguably would fear more than Lamar when it comes to throwing the ball in the playoffs. The biggest thing that I have is, that Baltimore team is absolutely loaded. The defense gets even better. You practically bring everybody back. The offense gets even better with Derrick Henry and stuff like that too. And so I think for Baltimore, every single year people have kind of, looked them over and kind of think they're gonna fall off and fall apart, but they still come back great every single year. I think Lamar's still getting better year by year. I still don't have him as high as many other people will have him. But I think this Baltimore team is loaded to have them in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, no doubt about it. And of course, technically, yes, the Ravens were only one game away last year. They could have went to the Super Bowl and won it, but it's just a confidence level thing for me. And it's like going into the
Yeah.
playoffs, there's three teams I don't want to bet on. It's the Ravens, the Buffalo Bills, and the Dallas Cowboys. And of course, not to spoil anything, but we'll talk about those teams here in a moment. At number 4B, this team, even though we both had them as Super Bowl contenders, had the same, I guess, averaged out rank as the Baltimore Ravens. But the Detroit Lions, we both have them as Super Bowl contenders. And this is a team that got better this offseason. It is shoring up this offensive line. On the defensive side of the ball, they brought in guys like DJ Reader, who's coming off an injury, but he should still be solid. They did lose some secondary pieces. But this is a team that was in the NFC title game last year. And if they kicked a field goal or two, Amir, we're going to keep talking about it. They could have probably went to the Super Bowl, and they already beat the Chiefs early in the year. Of course, we know different factors played into that win. But I think the most interesting piece here about the Detroit Lions is that if you want to say, hey, they don't have a secondary receiver, they have the 29th overall pick. They can go grab a guy like Keon Coleman or someone of that nature to pair next to Amon-Ra St. Brown. But your thoughts, why do you think that Dan Campbell can lead this team to glory here yet again?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think the Lions secondary got even better. I mean, you go ahead and grab Carlton Davis, which I don't see a lot of people talking about. I think that's a sleeper pickup for them. That's exactly what they need in the secondary. And obviously, I mean, the Lions played pretty much the whole year without C.J. Gardner-Johnson, so that's not that much of a loss.
Right.
And then you still got Branch who's going to be coming in year two. He's going to be even better. You go ahead and grab DJ Reader, and they've been missing a true interior D lineman, another D lineman that kind of take that pressure off of Hutch. And, the offensive line is, in my opinion, the best in the league. They got the best running back duo coming back, and Amon-Ra coming back. I think it's for sure, no doubt, they're obvious contenders.
I mean, hey, we had Amon-Ra as a top 5 wide receiver just a few weeks ago, and of course that stands tall still going into the next football year. Amon-Ra is very underrated, but I would like to see them get another receiver to really put them, give them that extra boost here next to Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown. You don't want to rely on what was his name, Josh Reynolds, to continue dropping footballs in the postseason. Cincinnati Bengals. I have them as a playoff team, Amir. I'm a big Cincinnati Bengal fan in the sense that I believe in their players, and we're Cleveland Browns fans, right? So I don't want to see this team win the Super Bowl. However, going into last year, I had them as my Super Bowl champions. Some injuries happened, and of course, they didn't look as great to start the year as I thought they would. But this is a team, as of right now, still has the best receiving duo or a top 2 receiving duo in the league in T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase. Joe Burrow's coming back. They've shored up this offensive line, and they still have another pick in the first round to either add to the offensive line or to add to the defense. This is a team I think can bounce back and be just fine going into next year. And in all honesty, if you want my opinion as of today, I think T. Higgins plays out one more year here in Cincinnati. But your thoughts here about the Bengals? Why do you have them as Super Bowl contenders? Because I don't.
I think as long as they have Burrow and Chase, they're going to be contenders. And I think for me, I was kind of torn because obviously I don't like the Bengals because I'm a Browns fan, and I was kind of looking at this contenders list. I might have given out too many contender rankings, but I think the NFL is going to be absolutely this loaded this year. Now, I think from the top 10 teams, it's a lot of talent. And then once you go from about like 15 and under, it's like a huge drop off. And I think for the Bengals this year, like I mentioned earlier, as long as they have Burrow, they will always be contenders, always be great. They'll always find a way to make moves. And my prediction is for them to, T. Higgins to obviously be gone, Boyd to be gone, but the O-line got better, the defense got better as well. And I think they'll still somehow find a way to grab somebody else to help out the receiving corps once T. Higgins leaves.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And again, Joe Burrow to me, second best player in the league when he's healthy. Ultimately, that makes him the second best quarterback in the league when healthy. We'll talk about who you think is the number 2 here in just a moment. But again, I'm a big Bengals fan. But what I wanted to do with my list, Amir, which is just, again, we didn't talk about how we were going to do these. I just wanted to give out 5. I wanted to give out 5 Super Bowl contenders and go from there, and go down the list. And, sure, Baltimore and Cincinnati could win the Super Bowl, right? There's always a chance. But I just wanted to give my top five as Super Bowl contenders. The rest of them, again, I kind of worked down the list. At number six, this is my fifth and final Super Bowl contender, the New York Jets. With Aaron Rodgers coming back, this team has shored up this offensive line, bringing in Tyron Smith. Amir, we thought it was going to be David Bakhtiari. Apparently, he's not going to be a Jet in 2024. It's Tyron Smith on that left side. They can still bring back Mekhi Becton to hold down that right side if he can stay healthy. If not, you have the number 10 pick. You can still go out there and draft a Rome Odunze or a Malik Neighbors, or you can just draft an offensive tackle on the right side. I think this team has a lot of pieces. They have the defense with Aaron Rodgers. If you draft a receiver, you got two dynamic receivers with Allen Lazard, Breece Hall coming back, Aaron Rodgers. Look, this team has it all to compete to me, and I think they're going to win their division, no doubt about it. And I think it's I know they're a New York team, but I don't see a lot of people saying this team could be a contender in 2024, but they have a complete roster with a top 10 quarterback of all time coming back to lead the charge. But your thoughts, why are they not a contender for you?
If someone calls this team a contender, I'm not mad at them because, like you just mentioned, I mean, they got a top two pass defense, in my opinion. I mean, the receiving, could they go out and just sign Mike Williams? Nobody's
I didn't even mention that.
Enough. Exactly. And then you go ahead and you got Garrett Wilson, who I think next year is going to be a All Pro with Aaron Rodgers. And, I think for this team, the biggest concern is Aaron Rodgers. I think for Aaron Rodgers, I think he's still going to be great. Like I've been saying the past months, an Achilles injury doesn't mean too much for a guy whose arm talent, is arguably the best of all time, who doesn't rely on his legs that much. But, the biggest concern that I have is, him missing an entire year of football. Is he going to be able to come in with this team, not have that much chemistry with this unit, off rip and kind of see if this team can get over the hump. And, I've seen, the Bengals team, the Bengals chemistry, the Bengals culture get over the hump. I've seen, pretty much all these teams, get that close. I haven't seen Rodgers, himself get over the hump and make it all the way in a very long time. So, it's going to be, interesting to see.
We talk about it all the time how important the quarterback position is, especially in the postseason. That's why we have that Joe Burrow and Josh Allen debate so much because they're great quarterbacks. But hey, that position is so important when it comes to the playoff time. I think when it comes down to the playoffs, though, and again, my counter argument to the chemistry issues is this is the most accurate quarterback, Amir, we've ever seen in the game of professional football, ever. And again, he's still working out with guys like Garrett Wilson. Mike Williams, of course, that's a new face. That's going to have to take some adjusting. But he has chemistry with Allen Lazard. He has chemistry with Randall Cobb. Of course, Breece Hall. I mean, you don't really need downfield connection with Breece Hall. It's a 5-yard dump off. I don't know. My biggest worry with the Jets team is really Robert Saleh because we haven't seen him win anything on his own as a head coach. So that's my biggest worry with this team is, hey, he was brought in to change the culture, but he hasn't really changed their win column. So I want to see him do that at the highest level. That's my biggest worry about the New York Jets. But moving over to number 8, we're going to talk about a division rival of the Jets, the Buffalo Bills. I have them as a playoff team. Again, they're like Baltimore. They're like Dallas. They're going to win 12 to 13 regular season games, go to the playoffs, maybe win a game or two, and collapse when it matters the most. But why is Buffalo, again, a Super Bowl contender for you?
The reason why I have them as contenders is because, every year, this Buffalo team in my eyes have been, so close to really, getting over the hump and making it. And, I think similar to, Cincy, as long as they got Josh Allen, the franchise guy, and, Diggs, I think it's going to be better next year. I don't think he really fell off much. I think Buffalo's still going to make some noise. Now, the biggest concern that I have is the defense. The defense got worse, and the secondary got even worse. But, up front, they're still elite. The front seven is still great. The run defense is going to be good. Secondary-wise, that's the biggest concern, but I think they'll attack that. I think they'll kind of boost that up. And then, you kind of get Curtis Samuel after you lose Gabe Davis, which I think he's better than Gabe Davis, in my opinion. And so I think Buffalo is going to be even better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Buffalo definitely has a chance. And again, Josh Allen is an amazing quarterback. I don't want that to go, unnoticed or, mistaken for my words. Josh Allen's amazing, right? And again, when you have an elite quarterback, you always have a chance. But again, I wanted to narrow my list down to 5. And Buffalo, with those defensive questions, just didn't fit their criteria. But again, they can address that here in the draft as they have a pick in the 20s. And there's a lot of talented defensive players falling down the board with all the quarterbacks in the first round. At number 9, the Houston Texans. I believe we had them around the same spot, but regardless, we both have them as a team that, not contenders, but they can still make the playoffs and maybe win a game or two. Again, maybe I think the hope for them this year is to make it to the AFC title game. I would say that's probably their goal this year. Realistic goal is a good way to put it. But again, CJ Stroud, this team, is only going to get better. Tank Dell, of course, will be out until about the midseason mark next year with that leg injury. But they got some extra draft capital this offseason, and I think they could still go grab a receiver in the second round with that additional pick from Minnesota. It's going to be interesting to see the route that they go, but what do they call their defense now, Amir? Border Patrol? bringing in a guy like Daniel Hunter. I've seen a lot of people start saying that, you had the Legion of Boom, now you got Border Control, or Border Patrol, rather, in the Houston Texans defense. But your thoughts here about DeMeco Ryans' team here?
Yeah, I think Houston is just outside that narrow contenders tier. Some people might argue, but like you just mentioned, I didn't want to just put 12 different teams in the contenders tier. I think next year's playoffs is going to be probably the most fun playoffs that we've seen in a long
Ever.
time. Anybody can lose at any given moment, but I wanted to narrow mine down, and narrowing Houston down compared to Buffalo and Cincy. It comes down to experience, it comes down to that quarterback position. I think Stroud's great. I think he's amazing, but I mean, this Houston team as a whole, like you saw how young they were once they faced Baltimore. I mean, the offensive line collapsed. Stroud didn't turn the ball over. I thought he played, solid for how bad his offensive line played. But you kind of just saw, them being young take a factor. And I'm not going to forget. I mean, obviously, up front they're great defensively, but I mean, last year the secondary struggled big time throughout the season. In the midst of the season, I mean, it was week after week teams were throwing, absolutely cooking them in the secondary. So I think for the Houston team, just age comes with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, at number 10, call it bias, call it whatever you want, but the team that Houston beat in the playoffs, and I think that's kind of why we have Houston above them, is the Cleveland Browns. A team that has a lot of questions. Look, we have the best defense in football, whether you like it or not. The best defense in football is in Cleveland, and it should return under Jim Schwartz next year to be just as dominant, or if not, we're still going to be in that top 5 range. The biggest questions with this team is number 4, Deshaun Watson. Is he going to play to the Deshaun Watson levels we saw in Houston? Or is he going to play what we've saw the last couple of years in Cleveland? I think all signs kind of point to what we've been getting as of late. But hopefully, maybe, now that he's healthy, maybe he can finally turn back the clock, Amir. But why are the Browns just not there yet, even though we have a top, maybe the best defensive football with a returning Nick Chubb?
I mean, the biggest reason why is because, I mean, we haven't really seen a glimpse of them being able to. Obviously, the closest that we've been to is, almost beating KC in KC. But, the thing about this Browns team, the reason why I have them at 10, some people might think it's high. But I think, I can't even argue against it because, I mean, the Browns, we go ahead and boost up the receiving core. We get Jerry Jeudy, which is what we're missing, a true number 2.
Right.
And then you go ahead, you bring practically the entire defense back, the entire D-line back, the entire secondary back. Then on top of that, you go and add some better coaches back there. I mean, you add Vrabel in there to kind of help out personnel sets and scheme. And you add Ken Dorsey, who I think, kind of help boost up Josh Allen's career, make him a more accurate and better quarterback.
Yep.
On top of that. And so I think for the Browns going into this year, I think, they'll honestly attack free agency in the most perfect way. And you go ahead and add more running back depth to help out Nick Chubb in case, he doesn't come back the same. So.
Yeah, that's the thing too. We talked about that in our group chat, but I think D'Onta Foreman, Amir, was strictly signed just to take the goal line carries, just so Nick Chubb doesn't have to get piled up on and dog piled on. Doesn't have to take those additional hits. I think that's the only reason we signed D'Onta Foreman to basically get CTE. is a good way to put it. At number 11, the Dallas Cowboys. Not much to say here. I'll speak for you as well. Great defense. They're returning. Of course, Trayvon Diggs is returning from injury, so excited to see him return. But the offense, again, this team as a whole didn't do much in free agency. They have a lot of questions next year with pending free agents, but they're just going to be a solid team to win 10 to 13 games, make the playoffs, and kind of collapse in the first or second round. At number 12, this is your last Super Bowl contender, if I'm not mistaken, but the LA Rams. I have them making it to the playoffs. And again, I was so much higher on this team. I'm the reason they're at 12 and not higher because I thought that I was going to have this team, in my top 10, no doubt about it. But Aaron Donald retiring, I know this team, is still very solid and still has, in my opinion, the best coach in the league. But at the end of the day, when you lose maybe the greatest defensive player of all time, it kind of knocks you down a little bit. So Aaron Donald, to me, bumps them from a Super Bowl contender down to a playoff team. But Amir, your thoughts here about the LA Rams?
This team is going to be absolutely scary offensively going into next year. And, the defense got even better. I mean, and the secondary, they got better. Aaron Donald left. That's a huge knock. I'm more so worried about, chemistry wise, culture wise with this team. But I kind of feel like Aaron Donald will probably still be around. He'll still be in contact. Still somehow, being involved with this team. But kind of like what I mentioned with San Fran, as long as they got McVay, they'll be absolutely great. And to be honest, they were arguably one bad holding call away from being in the division around this past playoffs. And I think, if they would have got past Detroit this past playoffs with, a hurt team, a knockdown team, listen, Brock Purdy and San Fran might be on the couch on the Super Bowl. So, I think going into this year, you go ahead and you bring everybody back. Tyron's going to be back. Hopefully he stays healthy. He had an absolutely amazing year with the O-line that did not play good all year.
No.
You go ahead and bring Puka back for year 2. This offense is going to be absolutely scary.
Yeah, they re-signed Kevin Dotson as well to help out up front. But like you talked about there, when we did our wild card round predictions, we were saying, hey, this team's going to go to the NFC Championship game, at least. They might go to the Super Bowl. That's how much confidence we had in the LA Rams. But again, of course, like you mentioned, some things just didn't go their way to end the year. Then we're going to talk about the team that has the greatest quarterback in NFL history. I'm already going to say it. The guy that just, he checks all the boxes, right? The only thing he doesn't have is Mike Vick's speed. I'm just joking, right? Jordan Love, though, a guy that's sat, just like Rodgers did behind Favre, and he looks like he's going to be the next great Packer quarterback. I don't know how they keep doing it, but they keep doing it. Jordan Love showed amazing flashes last year, again, with the most offensive line combinations, with no David Bakhtiari, a spotty defense into the second half of the year. He still led them to the playoffs, was the first ever 7 seed to win a playoff game, and of course, almost take down the Niners. If he didn't have, I'll admit it, he kind of collapsed and panicked in that second half. Made some bad throws, but they very solid year. I think I'd like to see them add a receiver or a tackle here in the offseason to help out Jordan Love, make his life a little bit easier. But your thoughts about Green Bay and why they're not over the hump quite yet?
So, going into this free agency, I was getting ready to put Green Bay even higher. But, I thought they obviously had a good free agency. Defensively, they got
Josh.
Boosted up the secondary. And, they go ahead and grab Josh Jacobs, which I think is great. But the biggest thing that they need is a true difference maker at the receiver spot. I think their receiving core consistency goes like this. It's a consistent receiving core full of just wide receiver number 2s. Which is, there's nothing wrong with that. I think Jordan Love is good enough to help out this team. But I think they won't get over the hump until they either boost up that front offensively on the O line to kind of take off the pressure off of J Love and help out the run game a little bit. Or until they truly get a true difference maker at the receiver spot.
Yeah. No, my worry for Jordan Love and this Packers team is that they're going to fall into the same exact trap that Rodgers did. And don't get me wrong, Jordan Love is not near Rodgers' level at this point, right? I don't want to, compare them to. But Rodgers, for years, when he started as a quarterback, he had a loaded receiver room. But after years, it kind of depleted. And in Rodgers' last 5 or 6 years or so, we were begging them basically to take a receiver. And they wouldn't. They wouldn't help out Rodgers, make his life easier. And I think Green Bay, they have a solid receiving core now. But if, 1 or 2 people start to leave, is this team going to change their mindset? Are they going to start getting some weapons in the offseason to help out their quarterback and make the life easier? It's one thing to have a great quarterback, but it's another thing to surround him and help him make his job easier. Because in the playoffs, of course, he can take you over the edge. At number 14, the Miami Dolphins. This is the team that we have on the brink. This is the team in the wild card spot, right? So we have them either making or barely making the playoffs or missing it. I had them missing it, in all honesty, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. But your thoughts about the Miami Dolphins returning in 2024?
For this Dolphins team, in my opinion, I'm not high on Tua, realistically. I think for this team, as loaded as they are, seeing the way they collapsed against good competition last year, and then seeing, how loaded their schedule is, how loaded the division is going to be this year, how loaded the playoffs are going to be. I think this team is on the brink of missing the playoffs / barely getting in and losing the first round. Like them, not being able to beat good teams. We look at the Dolphins compared to a team like Cleveland, right? Cleveland beat some great teams with their defense. The Dolphins itself, Tua absolutely doing it under pressure. Folded. And so I think for this Dolphins team, they just don't scare me the way they should.
No, absolutely. Especially with the maybe, top 3 receiver duo in the league. Of course, an offensive genius of a coach. I think the fact that they haven't re-signed Tua to a long-term extension is telling. And it really says, hey, we don't really believe in this guy as much as maybe we pretend like we do. So I wouldn't be shocked if this team goes out there in the second round, drafts a Michael Penix, drafts a Bo Nix, a guy that they can say, hey, Tua, he's okay. We just don't think he's the guy to take us over the top, and we don't want to waste Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and all these talented weapons. So I wouldn't be shocked if they go draft a quarterback. But for the reasons you stated, for Tua, I had them missing the playoffs. At number 15, the Atlanta Falcons. I think we both had them winning their division here in the NFC South, but they signed Kirk Cousins. Big offseason move, right? Maybe that was like one of the first big dominoes to fall. But Kirk Cousins is an Atlanta Falcon, right? He's going to lead the charge there, be the grown-up that they need at the quarterback position. Of course, they still have Bijan coming into his second year. Kyle Pitts looking to finally be what we thought he could be, right? They still have a talented defense. I do worry about the future of this team, and we'll talk about that next week, maybe, Amir, right? About the NFL futures. I do worry about this team and Kirk Cousins' long-term contract, but I think for this year, they have what it takes, and that division is spotty, so they, by default, kind of make the playoffs, and they're number 15 for me.
Yeah. I think they're right in the middle of the pack. I think for them, all the reasons you just mentioned. I mean, this team was one good quarterback away from making the playoffs and still in that division. And the fact that this division is still probably the worst in football, I mean, I think it's pretty, cut and clear that they'll make it. Kind of take the division. I mean, last year they're only a game away from, beating the Bucks out, which is crazy. Having Ritter at quarterback, having different quarterback changes.
Yeah.
And so they add Kirk Cousins, and so I think this year, despite them being how young they are, they'll still make a playoff push.
Yeah. At number 16, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, man, we have all four AFC North teams in the top 16 teams in the league. That's scary. I really think next year there's a chance. Again, the AFC's loaded. There's a chance all four of these teams make the playoffs next year. There's a chance with how good these teams are. But of course, they get Russell Wilson. They trade away Kenny Pickett. They also trade for, by virtue and choice of Justin Fields. They traded for Justin Fields, right? Because he wanted to go to Pittsburgh and join the best division in football. I don't know the rationale behind it, but they still have a very, very good defense. They can still add a guy like Justin Simmons, who's rumored to go there, make that defense that much better. This team is just solid from front to back. It all just depends on their quarterback.
I think for Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken, I had them a little higher.
Yeah, you did.
I mean,
you had them a couple spots higher.
Yeah, I think, I think this whole division might mess around and go 10-7. Realistic. I mean, we all might split because this division is absolutely loaded, and the Pittsburgh Steelers is a scary team. I think they could really be a very underrated team. I understand. I haven't been, super, super, super high on Mike Tomlin just because I think finishing mid every single year is just as bad as just missing the playoffs every year, not being able to get over the hump. And so I think for this Pittsburgh team, they're honestly scary because the offensively, they're still around the same. You get Russ. I mean, skill wise, they're not much different, but defensively, this defense is scary. I think going into this year, it's going to be a top 5 defense, no doubt, easily.
Yeah, I think they're going to have the defensive player of the year on their team yet again in TJ Watt. And of course, they're at number 20 in the draft. I could see him getting a Brian Thomas Jr., and I could see him getting a talented receiver like that to add to this offense with Russell Wilson and, of course, George Pickens, Najee Harris, and, of course, Jaylen Warren to mention as well. The Indianapolis Colts are at number 17, and I believe I'm higher on them than you. And I really believe that this team can maybe make the playoffs over a team like Pittsburgh, over a team like the Buffalo Bills. And it's for the reason that this team is a run-centric team. You have Anthony Richardson coming back. Of course, he's dynamic with his legs. Jonathan Taylor, we're waiting for that season where he just kind of pulls away and says, hey, I'm the best running back in football, right? We saw flashes of it 2 years ago. We're waiting to see it yet again if he can stay healthy. Michael Pittman coming off a career year. They brought him back. This defense has gotten better. They still have a pick where they can get that much better here, getting a guy like Terrion Arnold or one of the talented corners in this class. So I'm excited for Indy next year, but I think just with Shane Steichen, I'm a big believer. And with this run-focused offense, I think especially in their division as well, I think they could probably sneak into the playoffs. But your thoughts about the Colts?
Yeah, I think, I'm high on Steichen as well. I think he's a great coach. The fact that he came in, already his first year and made an immediate impact on this team is great. I say Indy is probably the toughest team for me to rank because I wanted to put them in the playoffs because I think this team is going to hit a huge leap. But realistically, the AFC is that much loaded, and my biggest worry is AR. I'm not as high on AR as everybody else. I do not. His accuracy kind of concerns me going into this year, despite this being a run-focused team. But I think the fact that this team still somehow won what 9, 10 games last year, and the fact that they got even better, I think this team can potentially make a playoff push easily.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Josh Downs coming back for that year two explosion. Hopefully, right? That's what we're hoping for. But of course, they still have a very good offensive line. I just need to worry about that secondary, right? But their
Yeah.
defense sets them up for some success. Tampa Bay, a team that made it to the playoffs last year and beat the reigning NFC champions in the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, the Eagles, a team that looked completely different from week 11 on, but still, they beat the reigning NFC champions. Baker had a resurgent level year, his best career year from the eye test and statistically wise. Of course, Pro Bowl year for him. They brought back Mike Evans, brought back Baker Mayfield. They lost some defensive pieces, Amir, guys like Carlton Davis. They cut a guy like Shaq Barrett. So I want to see them address their defense here in this upcoming draft, but maybe a guy like Chop Robinson out of Penn State is their guy to go to. But your thoughts here about Tampa Bay and why are they lower than probably most people would think?
I think for this Tampa Bay team, and listen, I love Baker. I think the ascension is good for him. But I'm being completely honest. I mean, this Tampa Bay team, throughout the midst of the year, like we're talking about this team being complete failures and then taking a step back, like them completely, missing the playoffs. And I think going into this year, I don't think this team will, do better than what they did. Like you just mentioned, they lost some pieces defensively. Obviously, offensively, they're still great. But Tampa Bay's, coach, I'm blanking right now. I forgot his name, but he
Todd
left
Bowles.
the one that exactly, the one who sort of, resurged Baker's career. He left and went to Carolina.
David Canales. You're talking about David Canales, the new coach for Carolina.
Yeah, Canales. He was the one who absolutely boosted, Baker's career, boosted Geno's career, and he goes ahead and leaves Tampa Bay and goes to Carolina. And I think that'll kind of be evident going into this year to show that that really hurt them a lot. And so I think Tampa's going to take a step back. And I think the biggest problem with Tampa was trying to build off of what they had last year instead of looking to make a change at quarterback.
Moving over to number 19, and you get the first look here, if I can talk, at the underwhelming tier. You see the crying emoji. Of course, I didn't know what else to put for underwhelming. Maybe I could have put an F, right? A school F. Regardless, Jacksonville, they lost Calvin Ridley this offseason. Of course, they brought in Gabe Davis. If you want to say that's an upgrade, sure. I think their best receiver as of today is Christian Kirk. No doubt about it. I love Christian Kirk. But this is a team that underperformed last year, in a lot of ways. And I had big hopes for them last year, Amir, if you remember. And they did everything but that, right? They missed the playoffs, didn't look great. And next year, right? If I'm not mistaken, actually, they led their division up until about the midseason mark, until Houston really took off and won that division from them. Regardless, Jacksonville has a lot to prove going into next year. And if they don't, it's going to be scary for certain people's jobs here in 2025. But your thoughts here about Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think this team's going to be terrible next year. Personally, I think after last year, what conspired, and seeing them, kind of fold in that division, letting Houston and Indy kind of take over and take a step over them, I think this team is going to take a step back. And also think Tennessee's going to even get better to kind of make this competitive, kind of make them lose even some more even games. And so I think for this Jacksonville team. I think after this next year, they'll kind of have some questions. Should they rebuild? Should they move Trevor Lawrence? Like what they should do. And this receiving core, like I just mentioned about Green Bay. The difference between Green Bay is that they played well last year with that receiving core. The problem with Jacksonville is, they have an entire receiving core of just wide receiver twos. And so I think this Jacksonville team isn't going to be great going into this next year.
Yeah, and well, I'll clarify. I don't know if you really meant this, but Jacksonville to me. No, there's no chance. Never get rid of Trevor Lawrence unless he goes like the next 4 years and underperforms. Trevor Lawrence is your guy, at least in my opinion, going forward. I kind of skipped ahead, but whatever. These teams are all underperforming. The LA Chargers, they just got Jim Harbaugh, came over from, of course, Michigan, the reigning NCAA champions. But he comes over to LA, and they had to make a lot of salary cap decisions that included getting rid of their starting wide receiver duo, Mike Williams, who's now on the Jets, and Keenan Allen, who got traded to the Bears. This is a team that, also could have also had to let go of guys like Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, but they restructured their contracts. I think this is a team that going into next year with the addition of Greg Roman, no doubt about it, they're going to be a run-focused team, and that's going to be interesting to see the narrative change around a guy like Justin Herbert, but I don't think they have enough this year to make the playoffs, especially when Quentin Johnston is their number one wide receiver.
Yeah.
Amir, your thoughts about the Chargers and maybe even going to Seattle?
like you just mentioned, though, this Chargers team going into this year, they obviously had to make those huge decisions, and that's going to hurt them for this year. I think, this will kind of be like a building block year to kind of get a feel for it. And the year after that, they'll kind of, research just a little bit. But I mean, this is by far, in my opinion, I think the worst receiving core in the league. I mean, if you
No
think
doubt,
about it,
no doubt.
exactly. And, I mean, last year, based off of how bad the defense played, despite them having a lot of talent, I think they'll do even better, but I just don't see this team really making much competition this year. So that's why I'm having, so low.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Seattle, we have them at 21A again. Last year, just sometimes Geno Smith was a quarterback and looked good. Sometimes Drew Lock, when he stepped in, he looked good. But this team just has always been mediocre at the quarterback position. Outside of that, their defense really, really played good last year. Sometimes I think there was 1 or 2 weeks, Amir, where we did our power rankings where they were in the power rankings. If not, this was a team that was always just kind of right outside the power rankings, at least outside of the top 10. Let me clarify. But the Seattle Seahawks, they have a great defense, but they just need to figure out the quarterback position. And that's kind of the same song and dance. But shout out to him for bringing back Tyler Lockett. Any additional thoughts here about the newly led, Mike McDaniel led Seattle Seahawks?
I think them, getting Mike McDaniel is great for this defense. I think this might be a absolutely loaded defense. This year, just based off, seeing what he's done at Michigan, seeing what he's done in Baltimore. They're concerned, like you just mentioned, the offense. Geno Smith, the quarterback position. I mentioned this beginning of last year. I think the biggest problem with Seattle is them trying to build off of the one outlier year that Geno had. I think it's going to come back to hurt them this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is another perfect team for a team like Oregon, or not Oregon, Bo Nix to go to, keep them in state, or a guy like Michael Penix. I think either or, keep those guys in state and go to Seattle. I think that'd be a perfect fit for one of those quarterbacks down the board. At 21B Chicago, you have them a lot higher than me. I think you had them at like 17, and of course I had them a little bit lower. My only rationale, and I have it as a rebuilding year. Again, they're drafting Caleb Williams. Whether you think the dude is Patrick Mahomes or you think he's a bust, rookie quarterbacks you can never make a full judgment on. And Caleb Williams, to me, I have it as a rebuilding year because he's the number 1 overall pick, and you're surrounding him. They have the pieces to compete. I'll say that, Amir, for their division. But at the end of the day, I want to see how he plays at the next level.
For the Chicago team, I wanted to put them even higher. That might sound crazy, but I mean, this Bears team is going to be a great team. Coming into this year, I kind of predict them to be, similar to it's like kind of like how Indy was, or like Houston was last year. Kind of being a sleeper team that's going to progressively get better. I'm looking at how great the defense played this past year, and seeing them win 7 games with Fields only throwing around 18, 19 touchdowns. I think Caleb Williams, who's already a better arm talent wise quarterback, is going to get an even better receiving core. The defense should play even better from start to finish this year. You go ahead and bring Jalen Johnson back. You got Montez going to be there for a whole entire year. And, not even to mention the receiving core getting boosted up, I think this is going to be a pretty solid team going into next year.
Absolutely. I hope they compete, right? I hope they compete going into next year. But at number 23A, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And again, I'm higher on them than you, but let me explain. When I did these rankings, Amir, of course, we're heading into draft season. I kind of looked at just the top 10 teams in the draft, and I said, hey, who is the consensus? Who are they most likely going to pick? To me, Minnesota, I think it's all cut and dry. Unless they can get a crazy trade in the top 3, they're going to have J.J. McCarthy going into 2024. And again, I talk about him a lot on those mock draft videos, but he's a winner. He does exactly what he's asked to do. And your job is not going to be that hard when you're throwing, shorter, 5 to 10 yard routes to guys like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Hockenson, Madison, Aaron Jones even. Your job's going to be easy to do exactly what you need to do with a good offensive line. Defense sucks, but I think J.J. McCarthy will be the quarterback, and I think he can do just enough to keep this team somewhat competitive. But for that reason, I think they're also going to underwhelm with the new quarterback. But your thoughts about the Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, I think Minnesota, I think J.J. is 100% their guy. And, them picking up Sam Darnold was kind of just a half a guy for now as a filler spot.
I mean, hey, he's 26. He's just entering the prime.
Which was crazy. How good this team is. I mean, he's still 26. He's been in the league for what, like
7 years?
7 years, which is absolutely crazy. But I think they'll go ahead and grab JJ. Kind of have him as a backup, serve as a backup. To start off, and then once Sam Darnold kind of plays like Sam Darnold, I should say. They'll kind of move JJ into that starting spot, and this team will be a solid team. But I mean, the biggest concern that I have, like you mentioned, I mean, the defense isn't good at all. And, them having quarterback questions and us not knowing for sure who they're going to pick up. So that's why happens so well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just a big believer in Kevin O'Connell. Really, all these guys that come out of the Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan system. Just a big fan of those guys. And number 23B, a guy I'm not a fan of, is Dennis Allen. He's currently the worst coach in the league. I don't care. There's no arguments. David Canales is already 10 times better, and he hasn't even coached a game yet. Dennis Allen he needs to go. I know the Saints like to keep things in house. They wanted to get a guy that was from the Sean Payton system. But sometimes you got to just move on. This dude, Dennis Allen's not the greatest coach, and the New Orleans Saints are kind of just the definition of mid from top to bottom. You're expecting a combination of Dennis Allen and Derek Carr to win you a Super Bowl. Just, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But your thoughts are here about the Saints.
Yeah, this team is going to be good. I mean, this team got worse offensively. Defensively, they're always going to be solid. But I mean, realistically, I mean, they overpaid Derek Carr, which is going to haunt them for the next few years. And I mean, like you just mentioned, Dennis Allen is not a great coach. I mean, this team is just going to be always just a meh team.
Yeah, and let me be honest with you guys. I'm a secondary Saints fan. Okay, Drew Brees played there. That's my favorite player of all time. I'm secretly rooting for them on the NFC side of things, but they're not there yet. Then we close it off with the bottom 8 teams. The Arizona Cardinals. You have them as an underwhelming team. I have them as a rebuilding team. I can understand the argument of why they're not a rebuilding team with their quarterback and Kyler Murray. However, the rest of the roster is terrible. They don't have much around Kyler Murray. So for the simple fact that you lost Marquise Brown, you're going to draft Marvin Harrison. So going into next year, your best guys are what? You have Budda Baker coming back for probably his last year in the NFL. Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Trey McBride. That's your top 4, top 5. Outside of that, you don't have much. So I'm excited to see what they can do this offseason. And again, I'm not a big fan of John Gannon, but maybe he can prove me wrong. But your thoughts here about Kyler Murray?
I think the Arizona team, I mean, once Kyler Murray got back, they somewhat looked competent, somewhat decent. And obviously, if you aren't, competing for the playoffs or you aren't making a playoff push, you're always going to be in a constant rebuild. So, I'm not mad at you, putting them in the rebuilding tier. I just think they're going to be underwhelming just because I think, Kyler's going to make them, somewhat competitive, somewhat, watchable, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you a hypothetical question here. Let's say the Browns underperform. Let's say the Cardinals underperform. Would you take a Kyler Murray for Deshaun Watson swap?
I 100% would.
Yeah, I would too. And that might be a hot take, but with how Watson's looked, he got one too many massages. At number 26, we have the Tennessee Titans, again, a team that has Will Levis. They're kind of rolling with them going into next year, unless they pull off a crazy trade. But they're at number 7 right now. I'm expecting them to trade down to get another offensive tackle and more draft capital. But they brought in Calvin Ridley. Some people think this offense is going to be okay. However, I don't. I think this is going to be a team that's going to, not look the greatest offensively. They might win a couple upset games. This year is about the development of Will Levis. And for that reason, I'm going to have him as a rebuilding team. Of course, with the new coach as well and with the defense, you're going to have to build back up. So I think it's a rebuilding year for Tennessee.
I think Tennessee is going to be, decent offensively. They're going to look well. I think Levis is going to show some flashes, like you just mentioned. I think he's going to, get some upset games, kind of like how they did last year. And this team last year was a tough team to beat at home. I think it'll be the same, same thing this year. Defensively, they suck. And realistically, this team just needs to completely rebuild. Keep building up for their future. But I think they're confident or somewhat confident. Saying, we got our guy at quarterback, we got some talent around him. So now let's go ahead and just build around him.
At 26B, the Las Vegas Raiders. It might be a shock here, of course, with Antonio Pierce. He was brought in to change this culture, and I'm very excited that they brought him back. I think that's huge for their future. And then you go out and get a guy like Christian Wilkins. It's huge for that defense and, of course, the culture there in Las Vegas. However, they just don't have the quarterback. Whether if it's Gardner Minshew, whether if it's Jimmy Garoppolo signed with the Rams. We forgot to mention that, I guess. But I don't believe Gardner Minshew is going to bring it to the playoffs. And I think that's kind of Raiders fans' expectations this year. I don't see it happening. So I'm going to have them as an underwhelming team, of course, towards the bottom of the list.
Yeah, I have them as underwhelming. I actually have them as tank for Shador. This team, them bringing back Antonio Pierce was a great move, but this team doesn't have doesn't have enough. They have no quarterback still. The only offensive weapon they have is Devontae Adams, obviously. The defense is just meh. And realistically, I think this team needs to completely tank and keep on building up that future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a perfect world for them is winning 3 to 4 games, being in the running for Shador, and then you have Gardner Minshew to be the quarterback to teach Shador next year, or whoever the quarterback is, whether it's Carson Beck, Shador, or another guy that there's always one guy that just comes out of nowhere, like a Zach Wilson, right? He could be the pick. But whoever the next quarterback is, I think that is your next building block. And of course, if you underperform again this year, a guy like Devontae Adams might be on his way out anyway. So you need that quarterback for the future. Carolina here, they signed Dave Canales for some whatever reason, Amir. We haven't talked about him all off season. We've mentioned his name about 7 times this podcast. Regardless, he's the new head coach of the Carolina Panthers, staying in division, which is a bit weird. Regardless, this is a guy that has helped transform Geno Smith, has transformed a guy like Baker Mayfield, like you mentioned there, Amir. They're hoping he could do the same for a guy like Bryce Young, a guy that was the former number 1 overall pick, has a lot. Hey, he has all the tools, but he just didn't have weapons and he didn't have a line to help him out at all last year. Do you think there's any chance Bryce Young can show some improvement here in 2024?
Yeah, he'll definitely improve. I think this team is just still that terrible to where you still got to continue to rebuild.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Brian Burns, of course, was a huge loss as well. But just getting something for him, I guess, is better than nothing. At 29, Denver. Jarrett Stidham is currently the quarterback, and hey, unless you think that they're going to go get a Bo Nix or Michael Penix, definitely possible. But as of right now, we don't know what direction they're going to go with. It seems like they're confident in Jarrett Stidham. And I'm not confident Jarrett Stidham's going to win you a lot of games. So for that reason, I'm going to have them as a tank for Shador team, just like you do, Amir. Any additional thoughts?
Not much. I think we got to start questioning. Maybe Drew Brees made Sean Payton.
Yeah. I don't think it's a question at this point, right? Sean Payton helped the development, but Drew Brees carried him for the next 15 years. Washington here with assuming Drake May or Jaden Daniels, whatever quarterback you want to go with. I believe it'll be Drake May. But of course, if you want to make the argument for Jaden Daniels, I'm not going to fight you too hard. But this is a team that had a very solid offseason. Some people think that they can make a Houston Texans level run next year. I'm not there with this team. Next year, again, about the development of your quarterback. So go out there and let Drake May or Jane Daniels develop. At 31 and 32, I guess, Amir, I kind of just threw it on there because these teams both suck. The New England Patriots, they're probably going to get Jane Daniels or Drake May. The Giants, probably going to get a Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze, one of those talented wide receivers. Who knows? Maybe they go out there and get J.J. McCarthy. I'm assuming it's going to be a receiver. But these two teams at the bottom, they suck. It's a rebuilding year for them. And I think for New England, I will say I have them as a tank for Shador team for the simple fact that if they go Marvin Harrison, go get Shador Sanders, right? Or whoever the quarterback is. If not, if you go Jaden Daniels or Drake May, then you still got to kind of tank and get that number 1 pick next year for the top tackle or top defensive player, whatever the case is. New England's not going to be great, and the same can be said about the Giants. Your thoughts here about these bottom 3 teams?
Not really much. I want to differ from you for Washington. I think, the fact that they get Kingsbury on that staff, I think they'll go ahead and grab McDaniels because he loves those dynamic quarterbacks, those athletes at quarterbacks. And, Drake May is obviously an athlete, but, I think, kind of his team, him coaching Caleb Williams in college, him, sort of, being able to coach Kyler Murray, I think they get McDaniels and it'll be perfect for him.
Yeah, I mean, my only pushback is, well, if you're going to let Cliff Kingsbury make the decisions on what quarterback you draft, that's a problem. It should be Dan Quinn's decision. And last time he was a coach, he had Matt Ryan. But regardless, right, Kyle Shanahan kind of made that offense look as great as it did. But that is it. Tomorrow I do want to announce that I'm starting a new series here on the channel. It's called the 5x5. So every single Friday or Saturday, once a week, I'm going to be talking about a different topic in sports, 5 different topics in 5 minutes or less. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about my 5 favorite prospects in the NFL draft going into 2024. But Amir, that is episode 152, NFL Power Rankings, post free agency. Any additional thoughts before we get out of here?
Not much. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm excited for this season. I think going into this year, this is going to be, most entertaining season we've seen in a long time. I mean, teams are absolutely loaded, and, it's a huge drop off. Obviously, from I say about spot 16 and down, spot 15 and down. But I mean, realistically, why wouldn't you want the NFL to be top heavy? It's going to be a lot of high paced games, high scoring. We kind of saw the theme last year that defenses stepped up. I think this year it'll be the complete opposite. I think defenses are going to step down and offenses are going to be even crazier.
Yeah, absolutely. Offense just probably just needed a year to adjust, but a lot of parity, like you mentioned, and that's always beautiful in the world of sports. But that's going to do it. Episode 152 in the books. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then, we're out of here.